Risen Lord, fill us with the joy of your resurrection. Amen.
Amen.
Please be seated. This evening, we have heard yet again the stories of deliverance and resurrection. We have renewed our baptismal vows, our baptism into Christ's death and resurrection. We have heard these stories in the language of the church. And I wonder what it might sound like in the language of today, in the language of those who are not churched. For example, we talk a lot about sin, Jesus dying to redeem us from our sin. And I don't know about you, but I don't run into a lot of people outside of church who talk much about sin. So how might we explain this and other concepts of this wonderful evening to those who are unchurched? Sin is often described as a distortion of our relationship with God, creation, and others. So what language might we use to describe such distortion today? One word that jumps out at me is trauma. In the psychological press, there is a lot of discussion about trauma, about personal trauma, vicarious trauma, community trauma, racial trauma, intergenerational trauma. Trauma affects all of us. And when we think about intergenerational trauma, well, that leads us back to one generation after another of trauma, and it almost sounds to me like original sin. Instead, we might speak about original trauma. And if we're thinking about sin in this way, how might we think about the crucifixion and resurrection? What we have seen during this past Holy Week is God becoming human, living among us, suffering a horrible death. What we have seen is perhaps the ultimate trauma. And I hope many of us have spent time this Holy Week thinking about the pain and suffering of humans, of sin, of our separation from God and one another, so that we might truly live into the beauty of the resurrection. Because the resurrection is the ultimate overcoming of trauma. It is the overcoming of all trauma. And in the language of today, when they speak about trauma, they talk about overcoming it in terms of resilience. Resurrection is the ultimate source of resilience. Another popular word in the language of today is vulnerability. And I was speaking with my spiritual director this week about how we understand Holy Week, how we understand walking with Jesus. And Jesus became vulnerable, even unto death. And so perhaps we are called to a similar vulnerability, to walk with Christ in vulnerability, to live out our baptism of being baptized into Christ's death in vulnerability, and opening ourselves to the joy and resilience of resurrection. Brene Brown has some wonderful TED Talks about vulnerability, and I'd encourage you to go out and check them out on YouTube when you have a moment. And she talks about vulnerability as being central to being fully alive. And I believe that by embracing the vulnerability of Christ, we become more fully alive. And so I'm going to lean into that a little bit. And I'll start off by referencing one of my favorite songs. It's by a folk singer named Dar Williams. The song is Iowa. And early on in the song, it says, "I've never found a way to say I love you, but if by chance, oh, I would. But way back where I come from, we never mean to bother. We don't like to make our passions other people's concern. And we walk in a world of safe people, and at night we walk into our houses and burn. And sometimes it feels like the church. It's a place of safe people, a place where we can't be vulnerable." There's a wonderful article I read a few years ago about how grief hides in the church bathroom, about how people come to church and they put on their best face, and when they are overcome with grief, they flee into the bathroom and cry alone. We are afraid of vulnerability. We are afraid of being hurt, of not being seen, of being seen is not good enough. Some of you know that I've been through an awful lot over the past few months. Some of you have stood by with me, and I thank you. At the same time, sometimes people here in church, to be blunt, really piss me off, right? I think we have a tendency to piss off one another fairly often. And yet, what Christ calls us to, what vulnerability calls us to, is to be able to say, I love you. I love you more than you ever realize. And that is what Jesus says to us through the crucifixion and resurrection. And by leaning into our ability to say, I love you, to the people who have hurt us and to the people who have helped us, we live into what Christ is calling us to. We live into being a beloved community. We live into joining Jesus into the neighborhood. We lean into fully working for social justice, such an important part of our Anglo-Catholic heritage. This is a message of resurrection. And sometimes we probably really piss off God too. And sometimes we manage to show God's love to one another. And through it all, God still loves us more than we can ever understand. Brene Brown talks about how the center of being vulnerable, being able to deeply connect to one another, is to believe that we are worthy of love and of connection. And that, for me, is the center of the resurrection story. Because we say in our service that we are not worthy. We are not worthy so much as to gather up the crumbs under thy table. And yet, our God is the same God whose property is to always show mercy, whose property is to love us more deeply than we can understand, whose property is to make us worthy and beloved. So, that, I think, is a key part of this Easter Vigil. Lean into God's love for us. Show that love to one another. Be vulnerable, even as Christ was vulnerable. And connect deeply with one another and those in our community. Amen.
Amen.